Yeah, Jasmine was last seen leaving her apartment here with her 7-month-old baby and her ex. Now, court records say they were on their way to get a paternity test done. And from there, the details get very gruesome, and Jasmine's mom is trying to hold it together.
Honest to God, I thought I would die before all my kids. I never thought I would feel this, ever.
A baby just 7 months old, found strapped into a car seat on the side of a road in Phoenix, Arizona. No mother in sight. No explanation. Just a tiny, helpless child left alone in the darkness. Authorities arrive at the scene trying to piece together what happened. The baby's mother, 21-year-old Jasmine Dunbar, had vanished. Her purse, her belongings, everything she would have needed, left behind near the infant. Something was terribly wrong. Jasmine had left her home that evening to meet someone she had once trusted, someone who was supposed to help determine the truth about their connection to the child. But she never returned. As the hours passed and her absence stretched into the night, an urgent search began. Police, family, and friends are desperate for answers. Who had left the baby there? Where was Jasmine? And why had she disappeared without a trace? What unfolded next would reveal a horrifying reality. One that no one could have imagined. A young mother's final moments, a chilling confession, and a crime so brutal it would shock the entire community. Jasmine Dunbar was a young woman with her entire future ahead of her. At just 21 years old, she was balancing the responsibilities of motherhood while trying to build a life for herself and her baby. Those who knew her described her as warm, loving, and devoted to her daughter. She had dreams, plans for her child, ambitions for her own future. But like many young mothers, she faced challenges, especially when it came to co-parenting. At the center of those struggles was Antoine, a 20-year-old man who had once been a part of Jasmine's life in a way that at one point seemed significant. Their relationship had ended, but it had left behind unresolved questions, the most pressing being the paternity of Jasmine's daughter, where was believed to be the child's father. But it was never officially confirmed. That uncertainty created tension between the two, leading to disagreements, frustrations, and an underlying strain that only grew with time. Despite whatever had transpired between them in the past, there was one undeniable truth. Jasmine was trying to navigate a complicated situation. Like many young mothers in similar positions, she had to find a way to communicate and cooperate with someone who had once been close to her, but was now on the outside of her life. And that was never easy. On March 6, 2018, she made a decision that many in her position might make. She agreed to meet with work to take a paternity test, a step that could finally settle the lingering question once and for all. Perhaps she saw it as a way to bring closure, to provide clarity for her daughter's future. Maybe she hoped it would lead to a more stable co-parenting arrangement. Whatever her reasoning, she took that step. But as we now know, Jasmine never returned home. That meeting meant to resolve unanswered questions would instead become the beginning of a nightmare. Young parents often find themselves in difficult situations, trying to raise a child while dealing with the emotions and history of a past relationship. It's a delicate balance, one that requires trust, communication, and a willingness to put the child first. But what happens when one parent refuses to meet those responsibilities? What happens when resentment, anger, or something far more dangerous takes hold? That night, Jasmine walked into a situation she couldn't have predicted. She had agreed to meet someone she once knew, someone she had reason to believe she could still deal with, if only for the sake of her daughter. But what she didn't realize was that this wasn't just a meeting. This wasn't about a test or paperwork or finding a way to move forward. This was something else entirely. On the evening of March 6, 2018, Jasmine Dunbar left her home for what should have been a simple meeting, one that could provide long-awaited answers about her daughter's paternity. She had agreed to meet Antoine, the man who was believed to be the father of her 7-month-old child. The plan was straightforward. They would take a paternity test, settle the lingering uncertainty, and perhaps begin to establish some form of co-parenting arrangement. But Jasmine never returned home. Hours passed. Calls went unanswered. Messages were left with no reply. For those who knew her, worry began to settle in. It wasn't like Jasmine to simply disappear, especially not when her daughter depended on her. Then came the news that sent a wave of panic through her loved ones. That same evening, a couple driving through Phoenix spotted something strange on the side of the road. At first, they weren't sure what they were looking at, but as they got closer, their confusion turned to horror. Sitting on the pavement, strapped into a car seat, was a tiny baby, all alone. There was no sign of an adult anywhere nearby. The couple immediately called authorities, who arrived at the scene and made a chilling discovery. The abandoned child was identified as Jasmine Dunbar's daughter. Beside her, lying on the ground, were items that belonged to Jasmine, her purse, her belongings. But Jasmine herself was nowhere to be found. The situation made no sense. Why would a mother willingly leave her baby on the side of the road? And if she didn't, who had left the child there? More importantly, where was Jasmine? Law enforcement wasted no time launching an investigation. As officers began retracing Jasmine's steps that day, one name stood out immediately: Antoine Ware. He had been the last known person to see her. He was supposed to meet her that evening, and now Jasmine was gone. As word of her disappearance spread, panic grew within the community. Friends and family pleaded for information, hoping that somehow Jasmine would turn up safe. But deep down, an unsettling fear took hold. Something about this situation wasn't right. A mother doesn't just vanish. The police had only just begun their search, but already the signs pointed toward something far worse than a simple missing persons case. If someone you loved went missing under these circumstances, how would you react? What would you do if the only thing left behind was a helpless child, sitting alone on the side of a road, waiting for a mother who would never return? The search for Jasmine Dunbar began immediately. Law enforcement officers, family members, and volunteers combed through neighborhoods, hoping for any sign of the young mother. Flyers were printed and circulated across Phoenix, her face plastered on every telephone pole, bulletin board, and social media post. News stations picked up the story, urging the public to come forward with any information. The discovery of her abandoned baby only intensified the urgency. Something terrible had happened, and time was running out. Authorities worked tirelessly, retracing Jasmine's last known movements. Who had she seen? Where had she gone? As investigators pieced together the timeline, one name kept coming up: Antoine Ware. Ware had been the last known person to meet with Jasmine that night. He was the one she had gone to see. He was the one who was supposed to help answer the paternity question that had lingered for months. But now, Jasmine was missing, and her child had been found abandoned. Ware had no choice but to answer some difficult questions. Detectives brought him in for questioning, and at first he stuck to denial. He claimed he had seen Jasmine, but insisted that he had no idea where she had gone afterward. He had nothing to do with her disappearance, he said. He had no reason to harm her. But investigators weren't convinced. His story was inconsistent. His demeanor shifted under pressure. The more they pushed, the more cracks began to appear in his version of events, where his lies began to unravel. And eventually, he caved. His confession was horrifying. Ware admitted that he had picked Jasmine up that night and driven her to an open field near 107th Avenue and Camelback Road. There, they got into an argument. Perhaps it was about the paternity test. Perhaps it was about their past. Whatever the reason, the fight escalated quickly. In a violent outburst, Ware struck Jasmine, knocking her unconscious. In that moment, he had a choice, one that could have changed everything. He could have called for help. He could have left her there and driven away. But instead, he made a decision that would seal Jasmine's fate. Terrified that she might wake up and report him, Ware chose to end her life. He lifted her unconscious body, placed her in the trunk of his car, and drove to a remote area. There in the darkness, he doused her in gasoline and set her on fire. He left her to burn, erasing any trace of the young mother who had trusted him enough to meet that night. It was a crime so brutal, so senseless, that it shook the investigators questioning him. This wasn't just an argument gone wrong. This wasn't a tragic accident. This was a calculated act to ensure Jasmine would never speak again. The case against Ware was now undeniable. He had confessed. The evidence lined up. The man who had once been part of Jasmine's life was now the reason she was gone. Thorough investigations are often the key to solving cases like this. It takes persistence, skill, and determination to uncover the truth. If authorities hadn't pressed Ware, if they had accepted his initial denial, would this case have ever been solved? Would Jasmine's family have ever gotten justice? What do you think? How important is a thorough investigation when someone goes missing? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. The search for Jasmine Dunbar came to a devastating end when authorities followed the path Antoine Ware had laid out in his confession. In a remote area away from homes, streets, and any hope of rescue, investigators found what they had feared all along: Jasmine's remains, burned beyond recognition. Her body had been left in the desolate landscape, discarded as if she were nothing more than an afterthought. Forensic teams worked carefully, confirming what her family had dreaded but already knew in their hearts. Jasmine was gone. A young mother, full of life and love for her child, had met a fate so horrific it was difficult to comprehend. The moment the news broke, a wave of grief spread through the community. Her family was inconsolable. The reality of her final moments was unbearable. Jasmine had left home that evening, likely believing she would return. She had agreed to meet someone she had once known, someone she had once trusted, for what should have been a routine conversation about their child. But instead, she had been betrayed in the worst way imaginable. The community's response was immediate. Vigils were held in her honor. Candles lit in memory of the life that had been stolen. People who had never met Jasmine came forward, offering support to her grieving family. Messages flooded social media, calling for justice and raising awareness about the dangers of domestic violence. Jasmine's mother, now faced with the unthinkable task of laying her daughter to rest, also had another responsibility: raising her granddaughter, the child Jasmine had left behind. The financial burden was overwhelming. In an effort to ease some of the strain, a GoFundMe campaign was launched, seeking help for funeral expenses and the ongoing care of Jasmine's little girl. The response was overwhelming. Strangers donated what they could, proving that even in the face of such darkness, compassion still existed. But beneath the grief and sorrow, there was also anger. How could this have happened? How could a young mother, simply trying to navigate co-parenting, be met with such brutality? How many other women had faced similar dangers without the world ever knowing their names? Jasmine's story became a painful reminder of the risks many women face when trying to separate from violent partners or establish boundaries with men who refuse to accept them. Domestic violence was not a new issue, but Jasmine's case reignited conversations about how communities could do more to protect women from similar fates. It was no longer just about seeking justice for Jasmine. It was about preventing another family from experiencing the same nightmare. Her daughter, too young to understand what had happened, would one day ask about her mother. One day, she would hear the story of what was taken from her. And the question remained, what could be done to stop this from happening again? What do you think communities can do to support families affected by such tragedies? How can we prevent these senseless losses? Share your thoughts in the comments below. In the months following Jasmine Dunbar's brutal murder, the legal system took its course. Antoine Ware, the man who had once been part of her life and the alleged father of her child, now found himself at the center of a criminal case that shocked an entire community. The charges against him were as severe as the crime itself: first-degree murder, child abuse, kidnapping, abandonment. Each charge painted a picture of the horror Jasmine had endured in her final moments. Prosecutors wasted no time making it clear. This was not a crime of passion, not an accident, not a moment of reckless rage. This was a premeditated act of violence, a calculated decision to silence a woman who had simply wanted answers about her child's future. As the case moved through the court system, Jasmine's family was forced to relive the details of her final moments again and again. The police reports, the crime scene findings, the confession. Every piece of evidence reinforced the same heartbreaking reality. Jasmine had suffered a fate no one deserved. Years passed as Ware sat in a jail cell, awaiting the trial that would determine his fate. His defense team made their arguments, but the evidence was overwhelming. He had confessed. He had admitted to his actions. There was no question about what had happened that night. The only thing left to decide was how severe his punishment would be. Then, in February 2025, Antoine were finally entered a guilty plea. There would be no trial, no testimony from Jasmine's grieving family, no need for a jury to decide his fate. By pleading guilty to first-degree murder and endangerment, Were avoided the death penalty. But in exchange, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Jasmine's loved ones, there was some relief in knowing that Ware would never walk free again. He would never have a chance to harm another woman, never be able to manipulate his way out of accountability. But no sentence, no courtroom ruling, could ever bring Jasmine back. No amount of justice could erase the pain of losing her in such a brutal way. Her daughter, now growing up without a mother, would one day learn the truth about what happened. She would know that her mother had fought to give her a good life, that she had trusted the wrong person, that justice had been served, but at a price that could never be undone. Cases like Jasmine's highlight the flaws and strengths of the justice system. Some might argue that life without parole is the appropriate punishment for Ware, ensuring he will never harm another person again. Others may question whether the legal system does enough to prevent domestic violence before it turns deadly. Could more have been done to protect Jasmine? Could intervention have saved her before it was too late? Jasmine Dunbar's story is more than just a tragic crime. It is a devastating example of how domestic violence can escalate to the worst possible outcome. Her case forces us to confront an issue that affects countless individuals around the world: the dangers of co-parenting with an abusive ex-partner. For many, co-parenting is already a difficult and emotionally charged experience. When a relationship ends, especially one that involves a child, both parents must find a way to communicate, set boundaries, and work together for the well-being of their child. But when one parent is abusive, controlling, or violent, this process becomes not just challenging, but potentially life-threatening. Jasmine had to navigate this reality. She was a young mother trying to do what was best for her daughter, and part of that meant seeking clarity about paternity. If Antoine was indeed the father, she likely wanted him to take responsibility. But what started as a meeting about a paternity test ended with her life being brutally stolen. Stories like Jasmine's are not uncommon. Many victims of domestic violence find themselves trapped in dangerous situations long after the relationship has ended. The control, the manipulation, the threats, these things do not always disappear when the relationship is over. In fact, the most dangerous time for a victim of domestic violence is often after they leave. That is when an abuser, feeling like they are losing control, may become even more violent. There are warning signs: emotional manipulation, isolation from friends and family, threats disguised as concern, sudden mood swings, a refusal to accept boundaries. These behaviors are often red flags that an ex-partner could become dangerous. But recognizing the signs is only the first step. The real challenge is finding safety. There are resources available for those in similar situations. Domestic violence hotlines, shelters, legal aid, and support groups exist to help victims escape abusive situations. But even with these resources, the reality is that many victims feel trapped by fear, financial dependence, or a legal system that does not always protect them. That is why community support is crucial. Friends, family, and neighbors can play a critical role in helping someone escape an abusive situation before it is too late. Intervention does not always mean direct confrontation. It can be as simple as offering a safe space, providing information on resources, or helping someone create an escape plan. Jasmine's case is heartbreaking, but it should also be a call to action. How many more lives have to be lost before real change happens? How many more children will grow up without a mother or father because of domestic violence? What do you think can be done to protect individuals from domestic violence? Are there enough resources in place? Or is more needed? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Jasmine Dunbar's story is one of unimaginable loss. A young mother taken far too soon, leaving behind a daughter who will never get to know the woman who gave her life. What should have been a routine meeting turned into a nightmare. One that ended in brutality, heartbreak, and a devastating reality for Jasmine's loved ones. Her family will never be the same. Her daughter, now growing up without her mother, will one day have to face the painful truth about what happened. And the community that mourned her will always carry the weight of knowing that another life was stolen by violence. But Jasmine's story should not just be remembered as a tragedy. It should serve as a wake-up call, a reminder that domestic violence is not just something that happens in the shadows. It is real, it is deadly, and it can happen to anyone. Conversations need to be had. Awareness needs to be raised. Resources need to be shared. Because for every victim like Jasmine, there are many more out there still trying to escape, still looking for a way to survive. This is where we can make a difference. Talk about this case. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have discussions about the warning signs of domestic violence. Support victims in your community. If you or someone you know is in a dangerous situation, reach out to the resources available. No one should have to face this alone. What are your thoughts on Jasmine's case? What do you think can be done to prevent tragedies like this in the future? Let us know in the comments. And if you found this story important, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more true crime cases that need to be told.